You have fire in your gut? Okay, we're here for a reason, to win games. So if you didn't have that fire in your gut, you better light the fire pretty fast.
Welcome in to another episode of the Shaving Points podcast. For this segment here, we're going to be joined by the spreadsheet king himself, Alex Katson, to talk about the Los Angeles Chargers. Alex, how are you doing this fine evening?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to come talk Chargers with us. And we'll see if Jay is able to join us or not at some point throughout the show. But I know that he is dying to ask you about Justin Herbert, because last year we got stormed by Chargers fans for some criticism from Jay of Justin Herbert that I've always been kind of on the fence on, but Jay's much more of a feel it in your gut and ride it kind of guy. And
Sure.
he's always had some questions about just how good is Justin Herbert. And I sent him this article that I found the other day over at Wide Left. Is it wideleft.com?
Wideleft.football.
Football. That's right. Okay. I knew it was something a little different. Written by you, that I thought did about as good a job summarizing Justin Herbert's career to this point and some of the questions around him. But Alex, where can people find this article, find other work that you do around the Chargers and the NFL? And can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that article going into writing it?
Yeah, so that article is on wideleft.football, which is Wide Left, the Substack newsletter that I recently became an executive of. It's owned by Arif Hassan, who's a fantastic former Vikings reporter for The Athletic, and now sort of writes about more so the business of football as it is. He's written about the Draft Network and about PFF and all that sorts of stuff. We're expanding that footprint this year with a bunch of new writers to kind of expand the content available on there. It is subscription based, but we really pride ourselves on focusing on long form stuff in an era where everything is increasingly shorter and shorter form. We really pride ourselves on doing like sort of feature length stuff. So I promise you it will be worth it. We usually have 2 or 3 articles come out a week. If you are just looking for Chargers stuff all the time, I also write for Chargers Wire, which is the USA Today sports media site for the LA Chargers. I do a draft show on Guilty as Charged, which is a Chargers podcast hosted by my friends Steven and Tyler. And I'm all over the place. I'm doing all kinds of stuff. If you like the draft, I'm doing the spreadsheet stuff that Quentin mentioned. That's over on my Patreon. I'm all over the place. But yeah, Justin Herbert, I think, had a deceptively good season last season. And I think that for a lot of people, it is deceptive because the playoff game left a really sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, right? Like it's one of the worst games that he's ever played as a pro. And so the pessimism coming into this season, I completely understand, right? Like he had a bad playoff game against the Texans. Greg Roman is still his offensive coordinator, and I think a lot of people around the media landscape don't feel very strongly about Greg Roman as a positive force in an offensive room. The weapons are kind of hit or miss, as we'll get into in a little bit here. But really, when you look at Herbert's body of work to this point, by pretty much every stable metric that we have, whether that's yards per attempt or turnover worthy play rate or anything that you can throw at it, right? Herbert had his second best season of his career last season, second only to the 2021 season when he was like an offensive player of the year candidate in his second year in the league. And so while the volume is not the same as it was prior to this point, up until his career here, last year, the volume was not where it was. He threw less than 30 times more times than he had in his entire career up to that point just last season. The efficiency is still very much there, and they're trying to take things off of his plate, not because he can't handle having that much on his plate, but because the Chargers to this point have put so much on Justin Herbert's plate to this point in his career, whether it's failures along the offensive line or failures to develop weapons or failures of scheme, with the offensive coordinator, whatever it is. Greg Roman is his third offensive coordinator that he's had in the NFL. Fourth offensive coordinator, actually, that he's had in the NFL coming into year 6 here. And so there's a lot of change that's been around Justin Herbert his entire career, and they're trying to take a little bit off of his plate just so that like the offense does not rely solely around like Justin Herbert has to bail us out on every single play.
Now, when you're talking about that volume, right, and that taking stuff off his plate because he's had to do so much for the offense in his career, do you think that being able to excel with that type of volume is a trait that needs to be practiced, or do you think it's more of a switch that you can just kind of flip when you need it?
I think that with any quarterback, the more you increase the volume of plays that you are asking them to execute, the more likely it is that you are going to run into trouble. And with Herbert specifically, this has been a huge issue just in terms of injuries, right? Like Herbert has never suffered a major injury in his career. He's only ever missed 4 games, and that was when he broke his finger 2 years ago when Brandon Staley got fired. The first game after that was the game that they lost 63-21 on Thursday Night Football, and Brandon Staley got fired the next day. But he's only ever missed those 4 games in his career. But every year he'll pick up a minor injury that clearly hampers him throughout the season. Like last year, it was the ankle injury that he had for basically the entire first half of the year. And as you increase the volume that you're asking of him, there's more opportunities to get hit, especially with the offensive line that the Chargers have put in front of him to date. There are more opportunities for, a turnover worthy play, right? Where Herbert is consistently amongst the top 5 quarterbacks in the league in limiting turnover worthy plays. It's usually around 1.22%. But with more volume, if that rate stays the same, you're increasing the number of plays that are going to be turnover worthy, right? Like if you throw it 100 times and 2 out of every 100 are going to be turnover worthy plays, if you throw it 100 times, 2 of those are going to be turnovers. If you only throw it 50 times, only 1 of those is going to be a turnover. And in the NFL, margins like that are the difference between winning and losing games. And so I think that like in terms of, whether or not the volume is something that you can practice or not, I think it really is just sort of like statistically, the laws of statistics dictate that like the more and more that you throw the ball, the more and more that you put all of your eggs into one basket, so to speak, the more trouble you are going to run into because that player is going to get worn down. That player is going to get injured. That player is going to make mistakes that they make at very marginal rates more frequently volume wise because you're asking them to execute more plays volume wise.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense, and that it's an interesting. I feel like it's not that often in the NFL you see a team turn down the dial on a quarterback's volume who's proven they can do it, right? And with Herbert, I love that you bring up the injury things because I feel like in my years of tracking him and doing this series where I'm like every offseason I'll go look at his numbers, look at his stats, look at why his stats might have been what they were. It's like, oh well, he got hurt this week. He wasn't the same guy for the next 5 weeks, and then it seems like he started to like come back from it, and that's a very valid thing throughout his career to this point. And last year he stayed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he stayed relatively healthy, I believe.
Yeah, for the most part, there was the ankle sprain at the beginning of the year. I think it was in like week 2 or 3 that then he was dealing with basically for the entire first half of the season. Chargers had a super early bye last year, so he didn't really get a chance to recover from it as much. And I think that really limited, some of the stuff that this new scheme and these new coaches really wanted to leverage in terms of Herbert's talent, right? Because like Greg Roman is known as the Lamar Jackson coordinator, for better or for worse, right? Like Lamar Jackson won an MVP with Greg Roman as offensive coordinator. Once Greg Roman left, everyone was kind of like, oh, Greg Roman was the guy holding Lamar back. But like, I think there was a very obvious vision when the Chargers hired Greg Roman that they wanted to leverage Herbert's ability as a runner a little bit more and get a little bit more multiple in the run game specifically. And you see that in the way that they move this offseason to change up the running back position as well. But with Herbert playing on a sprained ankle for, half of the season, basically this season, they couldn't really leverage that as much as they wanted to. And so I think that sort of limited some of the things that they wanted to do offensively. And then you throw in J.K. Dobbins gets injured right when Herbert starts to get healthy again. And then the run game from the running back perspective doesn't really get going the way that they want it to. And there's just a lot of things that like I don't think that they got to do that they were wanting to do last season. And that's kind of been a theme throughout Herbert's career is that like he never gets injured enough that he can't play, or very rarely, right? Like I said, he's only ever missed the 4 games. But you look at the list of his injuries And, like there's one or two every season. He's missed part of the off season, basically every season with, like last year it was with a plantar fascia issue. The year before that, it was a different broken finger. Like, he's broken two fingers. He's had plantar fascia. He sprained his ankle like 3 times at this point. Like it's all this minor stuff, but it stops the Chargers from being able to do everything that they want to do. And when Justin Herbert is such a focal point of your offense, as any quarterback in any offense is, but especially for this Chargers team that hasn't had a great offensive line in front of him, hasn't had great weapons around him, asking him to go out there at 60, 70% and execute a full playbook to a bunch of guys that can't elevate the talent around them, like it's just not a winning formula. And so I think like this season, there's a lot of optimism because Herbert is fully participating in the offseason program. The weapons look improved on paper. And so there should be a lot more that that this Chargers offense is able to do. And if they don't, then that's where you start to have the conversation of, okay, is this Greg Roman's shortcomings that we saw in Baltimore? Is this a shortcoming of Justin Herbert himself? Did the weapons not live up to expectations? Like where is the next pain point, right? And you kind of just continue iterating from there.
Now, so one of the more frequent positives and negatives in a way that I see talked about with Herbert is how much he limits the negative moments, but also that comes with almost a cost of like the way I've seen it termed is mostly like robotic kind of play, or the too quickly to get to the check down, too quickly to avoid a risky moment that some other great quarterbacks might turn into something great, where he might be a little too quick to say, I'm going to take the safe route here. Is there any situation, any moment, any comfort zone that you've ever seen from Herbert where he seems more willing to kind of take those risks, or more willing to any moments that might be different than that critique you hear?
Yeah, I think for sure this past season, the past 2 seasons really, Herbert's turnover worthy play rate has increased a little bit. Like the first 4 years that he was in the league, he was the number one quarterback in turnover worthy play rate at like 1.1, 1.2% every single year.
Mhm.
And it was like, this guy does not put the ball in danger. He's not going to throw interceptions. He's not doing anything to risk giving the ball to the other team. In the last 2 seasons, you've seen that creep up to closer to like 2, 3% as he does take a few more risks and kind of pushes the envelope a little bit more. And I think when he's been fully healthy, I think you saw it sort of down the stretch last season where he was a little bit more comfortable getting out of the pocket and making throws on the run and trusting that arm that he has where we know that he can make those throws. But it's been a work in progress for sure. And like the article that you referenced on Wide Left, right? Like I write about how being elite as a quarterback, to me, there's 3 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. There's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. You can put them in any order you want. I don't care. Those are 3 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And what makes them so head and shoulders above the rest of the league is their ability to create magic out of a broken play, right? Like you can defend a play perfectly. The play can be completely screwed up from the line of scrimmage because someone makes a mistake. And you still know as a defense that you are not out of the weeds, right? Because like they are going to pull something out of their hat and make a play, right? And Herbert is not able to do that as consistently as those 3 guys are at this juncture. And I think a lot of that has to do with willingness. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, right? Where Greg Roman is his 4th offensive coordinator in 5 seasons, going into season 6 here, right? And he had 3 offensive coordinators at Oregon in college. And so really it's his 7th offensive coordinator in the last decade, basically. And so he's never really had the comfort level of, okay, I know this offense, in and out, backwards and forwards. I can start to blur the lines a little bit and know that like, I have the chemistry with this guy to, make something out of nothing, right? The way that Mahomes does with Travis Kelce so frequently as an example, right? And like the Chargers haven't really had that guy because they've also been overhauling all of their, the receiver position, the tight end position since Herbert got here, right? And so for a few years that was Keenan Allen, and now Keenan Allen is gone as of last season, right? And so now it's about building that rapport with Lad McConkey as the new de facto wide receiver 1 for the Chargers, and seeing if you can develop that sort of chemistry of like, okay, like I'm going to get out of the pocket and I know that he's going to find a way to get open because we've repped it a million times, right? when you have to install a new offense every season, you can't rep situations like that as frequently because you have to install the actual plays. And so there's a forcing function there, right? Where it's just like there's a limitation in terms of what you can do outside of the structure of the offense when the team doesn't know the structure of the offense yet.
That makes a lot of sense. That's almost like, as you're saying it, what's coming to my head is almost thinking about Pat Mahomes. And last year, Pat Mahomes did not look like the Pat Mahomes that we've come to know and understand, and that it's because Travis Kelce couldn't do the things he used to be able to do. And he had a rotating door of wide receivers there, and it kind of, that playing it safe almost becomes the must do to be an efficient offense. That's what I'm kind of hearing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And we can welcome Jay into the show now. Jay, we were just wrapping up our Justin Herbert talk, but I'm sure you have some takes to fire off here.
Oh man, my dogs are chowing down behind me. I had a hectic night joining in, so excuse me for that. Chargers fan, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I was just curious. So Justin Herbert's a top 32 quarterback in the NFL, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I needed.
All right. Keeping it simple. Now that we've gotten enough Herbert talk out of the way, I think the logical spot to go to next is running back, because there's a lot of change in this running back room. Like, we have Najee Harris coming over from the Steelers, Amari and Hampton, the draft, kind of a surprise pick to me. I'm not sure how did you feel about that, Alex? Was that a surprise pick to you, or were you kind of expecting something like that?
I was not super surprised just with the way that the board fell. I think that there was a lot of focus on defensive tackle, but a lot of those guys went like right before the Chargers came up to pick. Emeka Egbuka was gone right before they picked, and so you knew that they kind of wanted to either build out in the trenches or they wanted to get a weapon for Justin Herbert, and I think that Hampton was the best one that was there. So it wasn't super surprising to me, but going into the night overall, it was not what I was expecting to happen.
How do you see this running back group shake out between the two? Like, I mean, I feel like Najee Harris is definitely like a thunder runner, right? Like, he's your thunderous kind of bulldozer type runner. Murray and Hampton, I thought in his college tape had a little of that too, but probably more breakaway speed at the same time. So how do you see them kind of splitting these carries up?
Yeah, definitely. I think Najee is going to be the workhorse from week one, right? And I think like Jim Harbaugh loves Najee Harris. He tried really, really hard to get him to come to Michigan when he was the coach at Michigan. He loves Najee Harris. And so the opportunity to go and get him, and I think really you look at, right, like the reasons why they moved on from J.K. Dobbins and went in the Najee Harris direction, right? Really all has to do with durability. It has nothing to do with performance because J.K. Dobbins was great when he was on the field, but he also missed 4 or 5 games. And Najee Harris has never missed an NFL game in his career. Now, Najee Harris has also never had a run go for longer than like 37, I think it is, yards in the NFL. And so that explosiveness that you're adding with Hampton that you mentioned is really like the number one factor there in terms of like why he's going to get a lot of carries coming into this season. And I think, right, with Najee on a 1-year deal, right, you were basically setting the stage for Hampton to take over either later in the year or next year as a second-year player and be the bell cow essentially. Because like this Chargers team, if you just think about the way that Jim Harbaugh's teams were constructed at Michigan always, right? Like they have 2 running backs that are capable of taking, 15, 20 carries a game, but they want to lean on one of them, right? Like when they had Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, they wanted to lean on one of those 2 guys. And even though they had both. And I think it's going to be a lot of the same that you see here this season. And I think at least early on, a lot of that is going to go to Najee. And then as we get later into the year, I think they'll phase Amari and Hampton in a little bit more, and he'll definitely have a big role, and he'll have a big role to start with. But I think his role will increase as the year goes on for sure.
Yeah, probably as he gets more comfortable with pass protection checks and stuff
Definitely.
along those lines, like to be able to actually play any down or enough downs to feel comfortable with him out there. That makes sense. And then we look at the wide receiver room. My main, or my not main, but my first question is, Ladd McConkey's the real deal, right? Like, I mean, he looked awesome last year. I loved his Georgia tape. Are there any concerns with Ladd going forward? Does it feel like the sky's the limit?
Sky's the limit, man. Anytime you can, nick some Chargers franchise records, Chargers rookie records, I should say, as a second round pick, like you're the real deal. Really nothing else to say. He's going to be the guy for this team.
Moving on from that, Mike Williams is coming back.
Mike Williams is back.
What is Mike Williams at this point? I have not watched a lot of tape on him, frankly.
Yeah, so I think the main bet here, right, is he's one more year removed from an ACL tear, right? And the first year after an ACL tear, even when you're fully healthy, is always kind of still a redshirt year, right? Like you still don't really have the confidence in your knee to plant and move the way that you want to be able to. And now we're 2 years away from the ACL. Obviously, Williams is also a year older, right? He's hitting 30. That's the reason why the Chargers cut bait with him in the first place, is because he was getting up there and he was, getting paid too much money. But now he's back on a cheaper deal. He's another year removed from the ACL tear. And I think really what this gives you, right, is for sure, because you've seen it, right? Because Mike Williams has played with Justin Herbert before, that now you have a bona fide sideline weapon for Herbert to throw those more dangerous passes to. Like Justin Herbert loves to take a hole shot against cover 2. The best guy to throw that hole shot to is going to be Mike Williams. It has been for Herbert's entire career. They didn't have a guy that could execute that play last season, and now Mike Williams is back, and at the very least, he can still do that. Whether or not he gives you any more than that is sort of the part that's up in the air, right? But they needed an X receiver this season, because last season they were playing guys out of position to try to fill that role after they cut Mike Williams, and it just wasn't working out properly. And so they needed a true X receiver. Bring back Mike Williams. It's a feel-good redemption tour. He gets his number back from Will Dissly. He's back in the 81. I'm excited for Mike. I love Mike Williams. Mike Williams has been on the team since I was a kid, essentially. So I love Mike Williams. I'm very excited that he's back. But he's definitely going to be. It's going to be more of a limited role than I think people are used to seeing from him in a Chargers uniform.
Are you expecting much from Trey Harris, or is he like the Mike Williams in waiting now? Of like you got to figure some stuff out at the NFL level and a more pro offense.
Yeah, I would expect him to be sort of the Mike Williams in waiting. I think, again, sort of the same way that we were talking about with Najee Harris and Amarian Hampton. I think that Mike Williams starts at X week 1, and Trey Harris is essentially your wide receiver 4. He's the first guy that comes off the bench. But as the season progresses, and especially if Mike's, doesn't look like the same guy, I think that Trey Harris slowly takes over more and more of those reps as he builds that rapport with Herbert. And he is the guy that they drafted to be the X of the future, right? Like he's going to be that guy when Mike Williams is done, right? Where like you could throw all those sideline balls to him. You can trust him to make those contested catches. Like that's what they brought him here for. And that's what he's going to do. I don't know if he's going to do that with very much volume to start the season, because I think that they're going to have Mike Williams do that, especially now out of OTAs and minicamp and everything. The Chargers wide receiver coach has been saying that both him and Keandre Lambert-Smith, the other rookie receiver, are kind of not really in NFL shape quite yet. Still working out of the pre-draft visit season where you get to have dinner for free every night for 3 months, and so they're still kind of working out of that. So I think especially with that context, I would kind of expect it to be a little bit more of a slower build for him coming into the year.
And I missed marking Lambert-Smith as a rookie on this graphic. I knew I was missing someone. Now that, and I love Trey Harris's tape. He was probably the most fun receiver I had. I had the best time watching his tape in this class of any receiver. That doesn't necessarily mean he's the best receiver, but like he was like my kind of guy. It was like he can go up and get it. He can dunk on people, and he's just a fun watch. Now, Quentin Johnston, when he was drafted, and I mean, on our graphic here, we have him as a starting wide receiver 3, and you just basically confirmed that for us, despite ESPN's depth chart having him as the backup. A lot of people expected him to be like an X receiver coming out of college, but that was never really the role he played in college. What do you see his role being for the Chargers this year?
Yeah, I have always wanted Quentin Johnston to play Z. And I think this year he's finally going to play Z, because up until this point, last year they tried to play him at X because Mike Williams was gone. And that's sort of what I was alluding to before. And he just doesn't have the physicality from an NFL perspective to go up and make contested catches with consistency quite yet. And so really, like, even though he's 6'4", and you think that he should be able to do that. Like that should be his role just from looking at him on the field. Really what you want to do is you want to get Quentin Johnson the ball underneath and give him yard after catch opportunities. And the best way to do that is to put him at Z and have him run some routes underneath. And the Chargers to this point haven't really leveraged that as much as I think they could. And I think that this year, with the way that the wide receiver room is built, there's going to be a lot more opportunity for him to do stuff like that puts him in better positions to succeed. And last year, even playing him what I would term out of position at X, like he did take a step forward. He is still not the, first round caliber player that, a lot of people were expecting him to be. I think even with that step forward, he is not quite there yet, but he did take a step forward. He got a lot better last season. And I think that, in year 3, like he's continuing to build that rapport with Herbert. He's going to be in the right position this year. I'm cautiously optimistic about what he can do because I think that the opportunities that he will be given will make a lot more sense for what his skill set is.
Do you think Quentin Johnston's 60, 70-yard touchdown against Michigan in the CFP just keeps Jim Harbaugh up at night still?
I would bet so, because the coaching staff, this is not the coaching staff or the front office that drafted Quentin Johnston, but they seem like they are still very high on him. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case whatsoever.
Yeah, I feel like Harbaugh doesn't quit on guys who beat him in college, and that's what I get stuck on with Quentin Johnston. Now, looking at the tight ends, how much split should we expect to see of 11 versus 12 personnel with this team? Because I do feel like, as you've alluded to with the Greg Roman offense, run heavy, that usually means more 12.
Yeah, it's going to be a healthy dose of 12, I think. I think last year they went to 11, probably a little bit more than I would have expected them to with a Greg Roman offense, just because Hayden Hurst was hurt for most of the year. And Stone Smart is not the caliber of blocker that the Chargers needed him to be in order to be functional in this offense. And so they went to a lot more 11, especially just to get guys like McConkey and Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston on the field all at the same time, because at some point you just have to put your best 11 out there. But now that Tyler Conklin is here and Oronde Gadsden II, who's been lighting up minicamp from all reports, now that those guys are here, I think you're going to see a lot more 12. I think you're going to see Will Dissly kind of take a step back into more of a primary blocking role, which is what he was brought to LA to do when he signed as a free agent. Kind of had to step into more of a receiving role last season because of injuries. I think Conklin can take over a lot of that receiving responsibility. Obviously, Gadsden can take over a ton of that receiving responsibility. That's what they drafted him for. That's what he's done the past 3-4 years at Syracuse. So this is one of the more well-rounded units in terms of improvement this season, I think, in terms of there may not be a standout guy, but in terms of how it fits in the offense and how it fits in the personnel groupings that they want to run, this is a much better fit of a group than last year's was.
And I mean, I'm happy to see Tyler Conklin with the quarterback who actually is a clear starter in the NFL, because I feel like he's a guy who
top 32 guy.
Yeah, top 32 guy. I'm not sure Conklin can actually say that very much about his past. But did you watch very much of Oronde Gadsden's tape at Syracuse, Alex?
I watched a little bit. I didn't watch a ton. Most of the stuff I caught from Syracuse was live views during the season. So I haven't caught a ton. I do know that he's basically a giant wide receiver from watching the little bit that I've watched of him. But I think that the Chargers are optimistic about his development as a blocker, because any tight end that the Chargers bring in at this point, you have to be optimistic about the blocking upside. Otherwise, they're not going to play.
Okay. And I really asked that because I saw the pass catching upside in his game, and I was like, okay, there's clearly something here as a pass catcher. More of my question was about his willingness with physicality. So sometimes at tight end, I think I might tend to overvalue that, but it just felt like he wasn't that willing or interested in the physical aspect of the game to me, which again, that's all personal preference and perception, right? Because you can't actually tell a guy's will through the tape. But the fact that Harbaugh drafted him makes me think that I got something wrong here, because Harbaugh lives and breathes for that stuff. So that's why I was curious about that.
Probably eats a lot of chicken.
Yeah, probably. But let's move this along to the offensive line. And Alex, I mean, we can wax poetic about Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt all you want, because I'm here for it. I love watching those guys play. I love watching those guys block. But I don't think that's the real question on most Chargers fans' minds. I think the question is much more about the interior. So what are you thinking? Well, first of all, is Zion Johnson moving to center? Did I get that right here? Or is that like a question?
It's still up in the air currently. It certainly sounds as though the Bradley Bozeman and Zion Johnson are going to be the two starters. It's just a matter of what position they are going to be starting at. And that part, like you sort of alluded to, is the main question, right, with this offensive line, because obviously, like, we know that tackles are great. It's one of the best tackle duos in the league. Like, Joel was all-pro caliber last season. Rashawn Slater is a former all-pro. Like, he's at that level. Mekhi Becton is a great add in free agency that's going to, fits the Harbaugh philosophy perfectly, is exactly what they want to do on offense, is going to, just like completely clear lanes on that right side with Alt. But then you look at the other two spots and your options are either run back the same left guard and center that you had last season that got Herbert killed in the playoff game against the Texans, or run back the same two starters at left guard and center, but have them both play positions that they haven't played in at least 5 years, and in Zion Johnson's case, ever in the NFL, and see how it goes. And so I think for people that are not super optimistic about it, I completely understand why, because on paper, that doesn't sound very good. But I think the reliance here and what the Chargers are betting on is that the continuity will sort of, rise the tide of all boats, so to speak, right? And bringing Becton in will help out the guy at center, and having, Slater and Alt cemented as those guys will rise the tides of those two guys at guard. And, like, as a unit, they will perform better, even if, like, there may still be one or two weak links. From a personal perspective, from my perspective, we just saw how that worked out in the playoff game, even though the right guard was Trey Pipkins and not Mekhi Becton, right? But, like, it's the same thing, right? Where, like, once you get into the playoffs, if you have one or two weak links, the team that you're playing against is going to exploit that, and they're going to continue to exploit that. And you have to have an answer for that I don't think the Chargers necessarily have a solid plan for yet. And so I'm interested to see how they develop that.
Yeah, you'll need an elite quarterback in that situation. What I love this offensive line. Bradley Bozeman, Zion Johnson. I think they're fine. I think Mekhi Becton is absolutely phenomenal, especially in the Harbaugh offense with the way he likes to maul people. I think Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, when healthy, I don't think it's debatable. I think they're the best tackle duo in the league. And I do believe in continuity. I do believe bringing this line back with Mekhi Becton added, with Joe Alt another year older, Rashawn Slater another year older, Bradley Bozeman another year older, Zion Johnson another year older. I think this is like a top 3 offensive line in the league.
So I because I'm feeling that same way, but I have a question that comes with it, because I see 4 first-round picks in this O-line, and I'm like instantly, that is like, wow. Like that is a lot of talent, just pure talent out there. What killed them against the Texans? Was it stunts?
It was sort of a combination of things. It was stunts. It was just guys losing 1v1 a lot of times. I think the protection plan was not necessarily the greatest every single time.
Who calls the protection at the line? Do you know?
I don't recall. They've started to give Herbert a little bit more of that responsibility, but I think Bozeman was still calling most of the protections at the end of last year, if memory serves, but I'm not 100% certain. Certainly if Zion starts at center, I would imagine that Herbert is going to call protections this season, or that Bozeman is going to call them from guard. But yeah, it was sort of a combination of things that just sort of led to a total breakdown. Basically, the Texans started sending blitzes on basically every play, and the Chargers protection plan sort of started to break down, just because, like, it, from everyone from the interior offensive line to the running backs to Herbert himself, just like couldn't get the timing right on fitting those. And so
the running back comment is really interesting to me. Who was the back?
Yeah. It was Dobbins at that point, Dobbins and Gus Edwards.
Okay.
And so, and to go back to that conversation, I think like Najee is a phenomenal pass protector. That's another
Yeah.
huge reason that they brought him.
Najee is a great addition. Him and Omari and Hampton. I think this offense is going to rush for like 2,200 yards.
I really get the feeling like with this, and it's not to forgive the interior, but like D'Amico is so good at putting the running back on the spot to be right in pass protection. And I'd have to go back and look at the film, but like I feel like it sounds to me like there were some communication issues there with the running back and the interior of who's getting what where. And the second D'Amico sees a weak link, he's going to kill it, right? Like so, I don't know. I'm really interested in watching this O-line this year because you just don't see this much talent on O-line.
I don't see a weak link. Like, I mean, I understand being a fan and saying something break down like that in the playoffs as a Cowboys fan for 32 years that recently decided to quit that train. I understand seeing a weak link in a playoff game being like, this is where it's at. But I look at this offensive line and I can't say that I agree. If I'm a Charger fan looking at this offensive line, I'm saying Justin Herbert has to be who we think he is, and Najee Harris can't make mistakes.
And I guess, Alex, I have one more question for you with this offensive line and one more note on it. I think that the depth with Andre James and Trey Pipkins is really strong there too. And Jamari Salyer, from what I've seen, like I think all those guys could be fringe starters on certain teams in the NFL, which as depth is outstanding. But what has held Zion Johnson back? Because he was a first round pick, but I know he's never quite lived up to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has really just been the mental side of things, because physically he's a complete specimen. Like he's routinely called out by the Chargers staff as one of the biggest, one of the best trainers, one of the most freak athletes on the team. It's really just been like the inability to pick up a stunt consistently and just hold up when things get complicated in the trenches, which is weird for a guy who was a computer science major at Boston College, right? Like you would expect a guy like that, and a guy who now you're talking about moving to center. Like centers always have to be the sharpest guys in the room there, right? And there's no question that Zion,
a little bit of overthinking.
Is a super sharp guy. But I think like whether it's overthinking or just not trusting his keys or whatever it is, like he's just struggled to pick up like games that defensive coordinators throw at him in the trenches. And I think that that's really been what's held him back. And so I think that's a main question that you have, right? Like if he's going to play center, if Herbert isn't calling the protections and you're having Zion set some of those, or you're having, Bradley Bozeman set some of those still, like they're going to put the center in conflict a lot more. Right. And so I think that's going to be something to watch for sure in terms of like whether or not that part is sort of started to catch up to his physical talent quite yet.
Well, that starts to track a lot more with the general fan sentiment around this O-line and what you were getting at of why there's more concern with it. Because one guy who is not tracking stunts consistently and not getting to his spot can blow up a great O-line. So that makes a lot more sense in my mind as you say it. Let's move on to the defense here. And I have questions with this defensive tackle room, including like left defensive end, right defensive end, because it's essentially like a 3-4 style defense, correct? Sure. How do you feel about these guys who you have starting in? I mean, I'm assuming it's Deshaun, or let's go back to our actual starting graphic for Agbonia, Tart, and Hand as the starters in there. Kind of how do you feel about them and how do you feel about the guys behind them?
Yeah, I think you look at the defensive tackle room coming into last season, right? And it's difficult, right? Because you have to look at what the perception was of Poona Ford before he had the season he had last season, right? And I think you look at that room going into last season and you could say a lot of the same things, right? But the key difference there is that, like, you bring in Poona Ford and T.R. Tart, you solidify the middle of the defensive line a little bit, but you still had Morgan Fox at 5 tech that led the team in pressure in interior pressures in 2023. He led the team again in interior pressures in 2024. Morgan Fox is in Atlanta now. And Poona Ford, who just had this phenomenal season for you,
Fox is
moved to the other side of town.
Such a fun, underrated player.
Yeah. And so you look at what you have now, right? And it's like, okay, like Deshaun Hand can play 3 or 5 tech. You can move him around a little bit. The staff is apparently very high on Justin Aboigbe, who is going to take over at 5 tech, right? Like if he's going to play anywhere, it's going to be 5 tech. Like they had him playing out at edge last season. And so like if he's going to play interior, it's going to be at 5 tech. Ogbonia is good, but he's struggled with injuries repeatedly throughout his career. Tart was great in more of a rotational role behind Ford, but now you're asking him to presumably be the main guy. And so
And
goes
I
back to
love
the
Tyler
volume
Tart
discussion.
as that rotational guy. He's an animal, but
Yeah, he's a
not
fantastic
a starter.
rotational guy. Yeah, exactly. And so it goes back to the volume discussion we were having earlier, right? Of like when you increase the volume of a guy like that, do you actually get a decreased utility out of him because the mistakes that are what makes him such a impactful rotational player also are what makes him a non-viable starting caliber player, right? And then Jamari Caldwell is a guy that I really loved coming out of Oregon. I was fortunate to be early on him because I also cover the University of Washington, and so I was watching some of Oregon's games back to get ready for the rivalry game at the end of November. And
wait. The Houston edge rusher, you mean?
yes, famed Houston edge rusher Jamari Caldwell. Yes, exactly. The Wisconsin game that he had at Oregon was one of the better games of defensive tackle tape I watched all cycle. So I'm really excited to have Jamari Caldwell, but at the same time, like defensive tackle is like the number one position where rookies struggle in their first year. Like it takes a second for defensive tackles to get up to speed with the NFL game. And so I don't think that you can necessarily really rely on Jamari Caldwell being a starter or an impact player in year one as a third rounder. Like that's probably going to be a guy that makes the leap next year, right? And so I do agree with you. I think that like if there's any weakness to point to on this entire roster, I think that the interior defensive line is one of the weaker groups on paper coming into this season, and a lot of it is just going to depend on like can Jesse Minter coax out the same sort of performance out of Deshaun Hand and a guy like Naquan Jones as he was able to get out of Ford and Tart last season and continue just sort of like becoming this, career rehab facility for defensive tackles almost? Or was there something about Poona Ford, the player, that made him so great last season that the Chargers are going to miss pretty sorely this year?
Now, one thing that I want to, because you're one of the first people I've heard say defensive tackle is a spot where guys take some time, and that this is kind of a theory that I've been, or not a theory, probably overstates what I'm trying to say, but like a concept that I've been playing with ever since like 2 years ago when the Bears took 2 defensive tackles early. I started watching every defensive tackle from that draft who was getting significant snaps, and it was like, Jalen Carter and Kobe Turner are the only guys who are actually doing anything. The rest of it seemed kind of lost, and like they're just trying to read. And it was like, okay, well, you think about the college game, it's so RPO heavy now and so spacing heavy that reading makes sense, as all these guys kind of know how to do when they get to the next level. So I think that's an interesting topic to kind of explore, because 5-6 years ago, I don't really think defensive tackle was a spot that took time, but now I think it is.
Yeah, totally. And I think like if you think about like the Texas A&M defensive line is the thing that comes most easily to mind for me, because all 3 or 4 of those guys got drafted this season, right? And if you look at the way that they play defensive line, every single one of those guys is taught to hold their guy at the line of scrimmage and then read for a run and then shed and go after the linebacker and go after the running back. There's no like it's run first, read every single time, right? Because it's so RPO heavy. It's so, like you don't want to get upfield too quickly because they might just throw it right back over your head. And so it's all just hold the guy right here, read, and then swim. And that's all it is. And that doesn't work in the NFL. You can't do that consistently in the NFL unless you are just an absolute freak of nature. And so a lot of those guys, and I think you're starting to see it at edge a little bit too, in some of these schemes, right? Like there's a lot of these guys that just take a second to figure out, sort of a more nuanced approach to reading an offensive line and reading a backfield and figuring out whether they're supposed to knife into the backfield and try to make a TFL, or whether or not they're supposed to be chasing after a quarterback, or what they're supposed to be doing on any given play. And that just takes reps, and like you don't have those reps as a rookie. And so I think like 100%, like the last 5 or 6 years, right? Like I think we've seen that a lot more, where it's taken a second for a lot of these defensive tackles, even the really highly touted ones, to kind of like figure it out, get their feet under them, and then really make that jump into the players that we thought that could be coming out of college.
And moving on to edge rusher, Tuli Tuipulotu. I mean, he's had some nice production in the league to this point. His PFF grades have not quite matched his production to this point, and I've seen some concepts that there's expecting more of a breakout this year. How do you feel about Tuli going into this year? And do you have any idea why those PFF grades might not be quite matching what his production's been?
Yeah, I think 100% you're expecting a breakout this season, and I think a lot of the plays that he's been in on, where Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa have both been healthy, which, to be fair, is not a super high percentage of them, but when they both have been, a lot of the plays where he comes in, he's coming in and playing 5-tech because he's coming in as part of that NASCAR package on third downs, right? And he's not really like super huge or anything. And so I think like if you do that, and then there's some plays where it's like, they run a draw or something like that, then Tuli's run defense grade suffers a ton because he's not necessarily like big or strong enough to hold up against a guard or a center, right? When he's in at 5-tech in this 3 edge rusher package, right? And then like a lot of his stuff to this point, at least, has kind of been more cleanup stuff because he gets an easier matchup, right? Because he's always been across from Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa, right? And when he hasn't been, then he's been the guy that everyone focuses on because the edge rusher across from him is, Caleb Murphy or Derek Tuzga or something like that, right? Where it's just like, we don't even have to worry about this guy really. We're just gonna send a guy and a half at Tuli because he's the only edge rusher anybody's ever heard of on this team. And so I think the breakout is expected for a reason, right? Which is, to your point, like he's been productive, and I think as a rookie he was incredibly productive. Last season was a little bit more up and down a little bit, but this season, right? Like every single time someone talks about Tuli in the Chargers organization, they're like every article written about him is this guy follows Khalil Mack around the entire day. He does everything that
not a bad choice.
He takes his brain 12 hours a day. They show up to the facility at the same time. They leave the facility at the same time. Like they're doing everything down to, the like minute by minute. They're doing everything the same. And like he is one of those guys that's just wired to be a Jim Harbaugh player. Like Jim Harbaugh loves Tuli. He talks about him all the time. And so I think, for all of those reasons, like you kind of have to expect a breakout here, right? Because like otherwise there's not really like a ton else in this edge room. Like Bud Dupree is a nice player. They just extended him for another year. But he's also not like, he's no longer a top 2 edge rusher on an NFL team, right? He's at his best when you can bring him in as a rotational guy. Kyle Kennard is going to be best when you can bring him in as a rotational guy, as sort of more of a DPR as a rookie for sure. And so, you kind of like, if you're expecting the same level of defensive play overall that I think a lot of Chargers fans are expecting because Jesse Minter is back, you kind of have to expect a Tuli breakout along with that. Because if you don't get that, then the level of defensive play that you're getting overall is going to take a hit. Whether you realize that it's because specifically of Tuli or not. So I think that those two things kind of go hand in hand a little bit.
I have a question, and this isn't because I'm a Bills fan. Genuinely curious. Do you care that Joey Bosa's not on this team anymore?
I care in the sense that Joey Bosa has been on the team since I was 18. And so
young buck.
Yeah. And so like I love Joey Bosa. I was super excited when they drafted him, back when they did. And I think that overall, separate from being a Chargers fan and writing about the team and everything, I think that overall there is much more of a lack of guys starting and ending their career with one team that I think should get the opportunity to. And Joey wanted to keep playing, and it wasn't tenable at the cap number that the Chargers were going to have to pay him at for him to keep playing as much as he's been playing. Yeah. So
and
I'm upset in that sense, but in the sense of like, am I upset from like what the Chargers defensive outlook looks like without Joey Bosa on the team? I think like I can live with it, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. And then this is for Q. Khalil Mack in 2025, what are we thinking about him? Just specifically him.
Dog.
Dog.
Khalil
Straight
Mack will
dog.
always be a dog. I will always
Straight
love
dog.
Khalil Mack, and I wanted the Bears to sign him this offseason. So, like, I'm jealous that the Chargers got him. I think he's still just a demon out there, even if he doesn't quite have the same step he once did. He wins with power and he stays healthy. Like as long as you limit
What
his
more
gaps,
could you ask for?
from himself a little, like he's a dog.
Yeah. No, dog.
Yeah. Now, looking at the linebackers, I was so happy to see
Q loves
Henley
linebackers.
get out there. I actually know these linebackers this time. Linebackers we have found this year are like my biggest blind spots. We got to like the Colts linebackers. I was like, I don't know. But with these guys, I actually like these guys a lot. I loved seeing Dyan Henley get out there last year and make some noise because I just love watching him because he looks like a caveman with like his fists rolling on the ground because his arms are so dang long. And Junior Colson, I was big on Junior Colson in the draft. According to this number, which is just PFF grade and snap count mixed together, he struggled some. But, I mean, based on the player I saw on tape at Michigan, I would expect him to become a good NFL player. But how are you feeling about these two guys?
Yeah, I love Dyan Henley. Dyan Henley is my favorite player on the team. He rules so hard. And like I legitimately think that like Henley, based on last season, is probably like, if not already, he is very close to being a top 10 linebacker in the league. Just because like there are not very many guys that give you the coverage versatility that Henley gives you as
So
like
unique.
a former wide receiver, right? Colson, I will give you some context. Ruptured his appendix in training camp, and then so he missed it was a mini camp. So he missed basically his entire rookie offseason, and then played like more of a backup role for a couple of games, and then I think broke his ankle, and ended up on IR for most of the rest of the season. So he like hardly played. This season, both Denzel Perryman, who you have backing him up, and linebackers coach Navarro Bowman have singled him out as like, this guy's going to have a breakout year, like 100% breakout season, like book it. Like, I don't care. He's going to have a breakout season. And, like this is the same defense he played in at Michigan, and he was phenomenal in that defense at Michigan. And so like, it's not like he doesn't know the scheme. It's purely just letting the game slow down and come to him a little bit more as he transitions to the NFL level. And, he doesn't have the live reps to back that up, but like he's presumably just been watching tape this entire year where he hasn't been able to play. And so he should be able to pick it up relatively quickly, I would imagine, and like with a vet like Perryman, who was their best run defender last season, I would expect him to kind of still have a big role, if not start right away, in front of Colson, just in those two linebacker sets to start the year, while Colson kind of like gets his feet wet a little bit more. But with a guy like that in the room that kind of can provide some of that mentorship, but also like be a productive player when, if Colson struggles, I think that this is a really, really good linebacker trio that kind of gets underrated a little bit because obviously like there's splash players on the edge, there's splash players in the secondary. And so, the linebacker unit kind of misses some of that love for what the team did last season.
I mean, with the safeties you guys have, I would be scared to throw middle of the field against this team. Just because those linebackers are, like you said, Henley is such a strong coverage player. One of my favorite things about Junior Colson's draft tape was his instincts in coverage and his ability to feel routes behind him. It almost felt like he had eyes in the back of his head sometimes. Like, I feel really good about these guys' ability to clog up the middle of the field. Once you get to the corner room, I don't know that much about Dante Jackson at this point in his career. I know I loved Cam Hart coming out of college. There was just health issues, and Tarheeb still had a really nice year for you guys. How do you see this corner room shaking out with Benjamin St. Juste coming over as well?
Yeah, so Cam Hart is recovering from a torn labrum currently. He had surgery in January. He should be I think he might be back now. If he's not back, he's at least working in like a limited fashion because minicamp was kind of the timeline that he gave at OTAs. Tarheeb still got a Defensive Rookie of the Year vote as a nickel corner, so he's solid. I'm good with that. Like he's good. Jackson, I think, is pretty much a bang-on league average starter at this point in his career, and I think that is fine because last year the Chargers had Christian Fulton, who was basically a bang on league average starter and had some health concerns coming into that year, missed a couple of games. And Asante Samuel Jr., he missed basically the entire year with a neck/shoulder injury that still has him unsigned, as far as I'm aware. And so what they have now, right, is I think a little bit more sustainable because if Cam Hart, with the history of shoulder problems that he's had, or Dante Jackson, who has a little bit of an injury history as well, can't go, right? Then you have Benjamin St. Juste, who comes over from Washington, who is another former Harbaugh guy, like committed to Harbaugh at Michigan before transferring to Minnesota. And so it's another guy where like it's one of Harbaugh's guys, like he's going to play in some capacity. And then Dean Leonard, who's the backup for Jackson that you have listed there, has been really, really strong in limited action that he's seen at actual corner. Like he was really pushing those starting corners in the preseason last season, and I think that there's a lot there to work with. And so really you have a 5 deep. Jasir Taylor has starting experience too. He struggled a lot in the slot last season, but like he's played NFL snaps before. And so really like you have 5-6 guys that are all like truly NFL caliber corners that can play and be functional if they need to play. And those top 3, I think, like it makes up one of the better young rooms in the league right now with Hart and Still especially. And then Jackson is just sort of like your steady presence on the other side as those 2 guys grow into their NFL careers.
And in the safety room, Derwin James, he's a hell of a safety. It comes out in the box like an animal and can give you enough in coverage. I was surprised by 2 things. One, I didn't know how good Alohi Gilman had become over the last few years, according to PFF grades at least. And 2, totally. I did not know Tony Jefferson was still in the NFL.
Well, he wasn't until last year. Tony Jefferson came out of retirement to play for the Chargers last season.
Okay.
Before that, he was in the Ravens front office. He was interning in the Ravens front office with Joe Ortiz, and then Ortiz got hired as the GM, and the safety depth was terrible. And so Ortiz coaxed him out of retirement and got him to move back home to LA, where he's from, to come out and try to play one more season. And then he ended up making the roster and climbing his way into some reps. But
was
yeah,
last year a breakout year for Gilman?
I would say so. I think probably the year before was
Okay.
like the huge breakout season for him. He got an extension out of it.
Okay. I was wondering if Jefferson like being in the room might have been like why he took a step, but
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, really the thing with Gilman is that he will make as many mistakes as he makes splash plays, but he is almost always just around the ball. Like he is a turnover magnet somehow. And like he has no business being one. It's really sort of just confounding. But like every time he's around the ball, like a turnover happens. Like either he forces a fumble or he recovers a fumble or like he gets a tip drill interception. Like he is just always around the ball. And so he's always creating these turnover opportunities, and that's what makes him such an impact player for this defense, even if he's not necessarily as talented as Derwin James or Elijah Molden, even who was great for them last season as well. But yeah, this safety group is really, really strong now with those 3, and Tony Jefferson, gave him some decent snaps last season. I think the addition of RJ Mickens helps with that depth a little bit because Gilman is a guy that has a little bit of an injury history. Obviously, Derwin has an injury history. Elijah Molden is coming off a broken leg. He's basically fully healthy at this point, but like all 3 of those guys, like as long as they stay healthy for all 17 games in a playoff run, you're going to have one of the better safety groups in the league. But like if those guys start to go down, like we were getting Kendall Williamson snaps in the wild card last season. And so, it's not
Bears legend.
Yeah, not the place that you want to be necessarily, but they're going to play a lot of 3 safety sets. They did a lot of that last season. Derwin was named an All-Pro at nickel corner because they played so many 3 safety sets that Derwin was basically playing nickel all season. So they'll
Where was
continue to
Still
do that.
then if Derwin was in the nickel?
I mean, anymore in the NFL, man, there's 2 nickels.
Okay. That makes
You
sense.
know, like there's
Yeah.
but also when Hart was injured, there was a period of time where Hart, Fulton, and Samuel were all injured, and so still did kick out of the outside for a couple of games as well. But a lot of it was just like Still would play half the game in the nickel, and Derwin would play the other half the game in the
Okay.
nickel, just depending.
And if
on
you're
what
in dime, I
group
guess
it
I
was.
get where you're coming from. There's 2 nickels
Yeah,
essentially
exactly.
on the field,
Right.
especially
And
with
especially like in passing situations,
Yeah.
like they would basically just go to dime and only have Dayon Henley out there at linebacker, and then just replace Dayon with Derwin James, who's playing, you know, a dime linebacker nickel sort of hybrid thing, like only Derwin can.
Okay.
So yeah, they're gonna do. I mean, they're still gonna do a lot of that this season, I would imagine, because like those 3 guys are 3 of their best 11 players on defense, and so you want to get them all on the field. But it's a really, really strong group. I really like this safety group.
Yeah, I mean, just watching, like looking through all this and talking through it, I feel really good about the overall depth of this roster. It's just that D line and the wide receiver room that have some questions, but like I do feel like they have the coaches and the roster here to work around that. But Jay, what are you thinking overall with the roster?
So I'm sitting here looking at this roster and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what a great roster this is. What a wonderful roster. Many people would call this maybe the best roster. I just don't see it with Justin Herbert. Year after year, I have to fight Justin Herbert stands, and I apologize if you're a Justin Herbert stan because he's a fine quarterback. Think about it as if you're a Dallas Cowboy fan. Is probably the best way to put it. I mean, he's in that Dak Prescott range where he's good enough to be top 3 in a given week, and you have all the stats to back it up. But at the end of the day, it's always the reason why you fall short. And I look at the team this year. I look at the running back room. I look at the offensive line room. I look at the coaches, and you're good enough to go all the way. I mean, you play in a division with an absolute monster like Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, a surging prowess with Sean Payton and Bo Nix, which I think Bo Nix is absolute fucking trash. But tough division either way. Tough division. Got to give them credit. They played well last year. Got to give them credit. But yeah, if I'm a Chargers fan, I sit here the same way I've been a Cowboys fan for the past 32 years. Everything is right there. The quarterback should be good enough. And for some reason or another, the quarterback's not good enough. And I know this all too well. I mean, I spent 33 years of my life as a Cowboy fan. I recently quit. I had to quit. Couldn't do it anymore. It's bad for my mental health. That's how I feel as a Chargers fan right now with Justin Herbert as my quarterback.
Alex, if there's anything on this little odds chart that we have in the bottom left that you would like, the win total, the playoffs, like where do you think there's value? Division, Super Bowl? Are you a betting man, Alex? I guess I should ask that first.
Legally, no. Betting is not legal in the state that I live in.
Okay. If you were interested in it all, where would you think there's some value in this team from the odds that you see here?
I think they're going to win a lot of games, not a lot of games, playoffs, Super Bowl, AFC Championship.
I would say plus 100 on the win total on over 9.5 wins is probably where my eyes are drawn first. I think it is a tougher schedule because they're a playoff team this year. You know, they're not coming off a year where they had the number 5 overall pick, but you know, we just went through for the last hour, you know, all the talent that this roster has and the coaching talent that this roster continues to have. Like, they should be able to win at least 10 games. And so I think like that makes a lot of sense to me. You know,
that's where
division is tough, you know, like plus 290 is nice odds, but at the same time, like they're in a division with the Chiefs. So what are you going to do? You know, I do think that like if there was any year where the Chiefs were going to be a little bit weaker, it would probably be this year, right? With Travis Kelce another year older and all the questions that they have on the offensive line.
A walker.
Yeah, and
I have a question.
Yeah.
We're talking division real quick. You're about to hop off. Who has a better year this year? Bo Nix or Geno Smith?
I would probably guess Geno Smith.
There we go. I love this guy.
I'm a fan of Geno Smith. I like Geno
Hey,
Smith.
Geno's a good quarterback. I mean, he's right there with Justin Herbert.
Well, okay. I don't know about that, but I do like Geno Smith. But yeah, I mean, like, it's going to be a tougher division this year, kind of overall. I think that if there was any year for the Chiefs to not win it, it would be this year. And so, if you want to sprinkle a little bit on plus 290, I certainly would.
Talent's there, 3-1,
yeah.
3-1.
I mean,
talent's there.
I'm 100% with you, Alex. I'm the 9.5 seems like plus 100. That seems like automatic to me when I'm talking to Jim Harbaugh team. I mean, Jim Harbaugh has had one season under his belt where he didn't achieve that,
and he eats chicken now.
And he eats chicken.
Little extra protein.
Do you know the chicken story with Jim Harbaugh, Alex?
Oh, of course. How could you not?
But he eats chicken now.
It's a scary bird.
Changed his mind. Went from a nervous bird to a hard-working bird. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah.
So he's adaptable.
And frankly, Alex, I'm with you too. I'd sprinkle division. I really would, because
3-1.
It's a Jim Harbaugh. I think Jim Harbaugh might win the division this year. I think the Chiefs do have some vulnerabilities. I think maybe they'll figure that out by the playoffs. Maybe they won't. But during the regular season, I think they will go through some ups and downs after a year where last year they left their heart and soul out there to win every game they could in the regular season, and it might have cost them at the end. I could see them kind of faltering down to a wild card team this year potentially. But to me, those are the two bets.
If they don't win the division, what goes wrong? Is it
the Chargers?
Yeah, is it just the fact that everything goes right for the Chiefs, or what breaks down on this team that prevents them from winning the division? Because I look at this team, and I mean, 12 game, I look at this team and I say it's 12 win team. So either the Chiefs win 13 or something breaks down. Which do you think it is?
I mean, I will never bet against the Chiefs winning 13 games in a season. So, there's that aspect of it. But yeah, I mean, I think
Patrick Mahomes never even sniffed a conference championship in college.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I mean, if something is going to break down on this team, I think, there's a lot of bets on health that the Chargers are making, right? Like, Najee Harris has never missed a game, but now he's a Charger. And the Charger franchise is not necessarily known for keeping players healthy.
I've never known a Charger to miss a game.
Yeah. But Mike Williams is liable to get hurt. One of the corners is liable to get hurt, right? Like, if you lose a guy on the interior of the defensive line, the depth falls off very quickly. If one of the three safeties misses a chunk of time because of injury, there's a lot of reasons, right, where there's a lot of players on this team still, as much talent as they have. There's a lot of players with injury histories and with injury concerns that could hamstring them from reaching their full potential still, because at the end of the day, there's still almost 3 months before we play any games, and so there's still plenty of time for something like that to happen. And being a Chargers fan all my life, I know for sure one of those things will happen because it's the Chargers.
Yes, sir.
And Alex, I got 2 more quick questions for you, potentially 2, maybe only one. Does Christian Fulton going to the Chiefs worry you at all?
Not particularly. I mean, I think that it's a better CB2 than the sort of hodgepodge of guys that they've put next to Trent McDuffie, to this point. But ultimately, Christian Fulton was good last year for the Chargers, but he's not a player that scares me.
Okay, and that was for my own purposes, because we're talking Chiefs after this. And second, were you wearing a Michigan shirt when I saw you stand up earlier, or did I missee that?
Yeah, I am wearing a Michigan shirt, actually. Both of my parents are alums of the University of Michigan, and my grandfather taught there. So I grew up a Michigan man.
Okay. So what happened to Mozzie Smith?
Oh, don't get me started.
The Cowboys asked him to gain a bunch of weight and then lose a bunch of weight.
It was only 6 to 7 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if there was something more to it than that, or like if that, because that was my thought
sort of,
process
like,
too. But
Okay,
you just keep telling me he
okay.
sucks.
Yeah, the role.
Rewind. Well,
it's been like a weird-
We know Mozzie Smith. Everybody looks to joke about Mozzie Smith. What happened to Taco Charlton? Super Bowl winner.
Yeah. See, that's a good one. I think
Super Bowl winner.
Super
got a
Bowl winner
ring.
Taco Charlton. That's right.
Put some
Yeah, I
respect on
mean,
his name.
Former Bears legend.
I don't have a great answer for Taco Charlton, to be honest.
Okay.
I think
It's a
that-
Michigan thing. I've been telling Q for years it's a Michigan thing.
All right. Well, Jay, did you have anything else for Alex before we let him get out of here?
Not necessarily for Alex, but for all Chargers fans out there right now, you can get Omarion Hampton for Offensive Rookie of the Year at 10-1. And if you're not taking Omarion Hampton Offensive Rookie of the Year at 10-1 with this offensive rookie class, you are freaking crazy. Take Omarion Hampton 10-1 Rookie of the Year. Look at this offensive line. Look at what Jim Harbaugh likes to do. I don't care that Najee Harris is there. Omarion Hampton is a dog. You're getting him at 10-1 with how good he is at running the football. Take him.
I like
definitely good value at 10-1. I like that.
Alex, can you let everyone else know where they can find you, find your work one more time before we let you go?
Yeah, the easiest way is just to go to Twitter and search up my name, Alex Katson, Katson. I also do have a website, alexkatson.com. It's just my name.com that has links to everywhere that I do stuff right now. I actually do need to update it with the wide left stuff, but those are probably the easiest places to find me because I'm in so many places at once these days that listing them all off will take me another 5 minutes. So just go to Twitter, go to my website, and then go from there.
Absolutely, and I just want to make it clear for everybody. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this podcast. I had some family stuff going on. I'm not a Chargers hater. I like the Chargers. I just don't like Justin Herbert.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for being generous with your time tonight and jumping on with us. And we hope you have a wonderful evening.
Absolutely. You guys too.
All right.
Yes, sir. Bolt down.